sat down and done something like that, where you actually analyze what the Bible is saying? Good job.
Go Sam, go.
Anybody? Was this new? Was this hard? It was difficult? Okay. All right, I think one thing I always think is it's going to be easier than it actually is. When we open the Bible, these classes I've been in have taught me it takes a lot more time than I used to put into reading the Bible to actually understand what's being said. So this was just, I gave y'all an extra minute or two, but this was basically 10 minutes of work, and you already have like a whiteboard full of attributes of God. So we started talking last week about Saturate. We started talking about what it would look like if God completely filled your life, saturated every part of your being. Okay? So we were talking about that in the context of living a life that was full of worship. Okay, so a lot of people put worship in this little box of standing up for 10 minutes at the beginning of church and singing, and then you sit down and get to the reading of the word and stuff like that. But worship is a lot bigger than music. Worship is a lot bigger than playing guitar. Worship is a lot bigger than putting lyrics on a screen. And we kind of, because of our experiences, limit God when we put him in that little box. Can anybody tell me what Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2 say that we talked about last week? Anybody who can quote it?
Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, holy and pleasing sacrifice by a living sacrifice.
It's close. And 2?
And
that's cool. Awesome job. Anybody else want to try?
the only reason I remembered that is what y'all near the senior project.
You can't read it. You got to quote it. Romans 12, 1 and 2. Okay, I was going to give whoever could do it $20. That's unfortunate for you guys. Okay, it says, therefore I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing. This is your spiritual act of worship. And then it says, do not conform any longer to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Okay, so this whole series is found in this one verse. And we're going to take a little phrase at a time, and we're just going to unpack it. And we're going to look at what Paul is urging us to do here. He says, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy. So tonight, we're going to look at what in view of God's mercy is. So we're going to look at God's mercy. And just to give you a little background on Romans, Romans is, written to believers in the city of Rome. Does anybody know much about Rome from history? Have you watched Spartacus or anything like that? Not the new one, the old movie that's not completely inappropriate.
I've been there.
You've been to Rome? Awesome. Cool. Okay, so what you might know about Rome is what you've seen from the movies with the soldiers and stuff like that. Also, Greek mythology was also kind of Roman mythology. So they had kind of the same gods with different names. So in Rome, they called people after, the planets. So I don't know. I'm pretty sure the gods came before the planets, and the planets were named after the gods. But they had all these gods. And Rome was really like, they believed in a lot of gods, and people would choose a god to kind of worship mostly. So people in the army would kind of choose Mars, who was the god of war, and things like that. So you would pick kind of your favorite god, or a guy who might like you because of what you were able to do for him, and you would worship him based on that. So Paul writes this letter into this context, and he has never been to Rome before. He's getting ready to try to come. So he writes this letter to kind of get to know them and to kind of address some things about God and kind of introduce theology to them. Many people believe that the Roman church was started by Jews who were at Pentecost that we talked about a couple weeks ago. And they brought Christianity, or the way, back to Rome and started the church. Okay, so Paul usually writes in kind of a form. So the beginning of his letters start out as really theological. And he goes through, this is who God is, and this is why you should, this is what you should believe, and all these things because of what Christ did. And then his second section is practical, where he says, because of who God is, this is how you should live. This is how you should behave. So the first one is what to believe, and then the second part is how to behave in response to what you now believe. Okay? So chapter 12 is kind of the break between these sections. And I told you last week, and y'all made fun of me for saying when you see something that says therefore, ask what it's there for. And y'all said I was old, as if literary devices and things have changed in the past century. Okay, so, I don't know. They have. Okay, the Roman church is believed to be started by Jews that became Christians on Pentecost. So, it says, in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. So what does God's mercy look like? First of all, what does mercy mean? Anybody? Anybody? Forgiveness? Okay. What else?
Not punishing you when you deserve it.
Okay, not punishing you when you deserve it. Yep. Okay, so I looked it up, and it says...
Dictionary.com?
Yes, absolutely. Compassionate forbearance shown to an offender, an enemy, or other person. So now I have to ask, what does forbearance mean? Anybody there? Compassionate forbearance. So forbearance is patient self-control or abstaining from enforcing a right. So mercy is basically not giving someone what they deserve. So, in the Bible where we have a parable Jesus tells, and there's this one servant who owes his master money. And the master comes to collect, and he can't pay, so he begs for mercy. He owed him money, but he wanted his master to overlook his offense, to overlook the fact that he doesn't have the money to pay, and grant him forgiveness. So we see in that picture this idea of mercy come in, because the master feels compassion for him, and he wipes away all the debt. And then we see the same guy who just had his debt wiped away, and it was a massive debt, go to another guy who owed him a small debt. And we see him not show mercy. We see the same scenario happen. He says, pay me my money. And the guy says, I can't. I beg for mercy. Please have mercy on me and my family. We've gone through some tough times, And he shows no mercy, and he has him thrown in prison. So we get in this a picture of mercy. And this is exactly the picture that Paul wants us to have of God. So patience, self-control, have patience and self-control with me as I mess up, God. So in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. So this list is a lot of good things, right? I wish people said this stuff about me, except for God. I wish people said I was wise and knowledgeable and just and holy and gracious and things like that. Yeah, I wish I could kill sin. I wish I could. But these are things that only God can do. And basically what Paul does here is he presents this kind of like a court case, like he's giving evidence for something. Okay? So he starts out and he's talking about God, and he shares all these things. And I've got a pretty complete list, and I'm just going to read them really fast. So this is what God's mercy is. So on attribute side, he says, he's near you, the end of the law, powerful, compassionate, glorious, greater than life, full of life, peaceful, righteous, a leader, father, giving, in control, helpful, knowledgeable, for us, just, merciful, kind, and stern. Those are the things that are given to us in chapters 6 through 11. And then as far as attributes go, he chooses us. He holds out his hand. He reaches for the unexpected. He defeats death. He frees us from sin. He's freeing. He rescues from death. He gives life. He relieves fear. Works for the good. Knew us before we had knowledge. He destines us. He calls us. He justifies. He glorifies. He loves us. He confirms us. He prepares us. He reveals himself. He does not shame those who believe. He doesn't show favorites. He accepts, he supports, and he takes away sin. Those are all the things that Paul tells us about God's nature in these verses. And then he says, because of all these things, because there are all these things that only God can do, your response should be to give him your entire life. Okay? Because of all these things, you should give him your entire life. Okay, so Paul lived in a system that was based on the law. And it's not it's not anything like our law, really, where, you have laws, and if you break one, you go pay a fine and you're good. Or you go to jail and you do your time and you're good. At this point, if you broke the law, they would kill you. Okay? And the laws of God were the basis of their society. Not the Roman society, but the Jewish society. So you have a group of people who looks to God and who looks to the laws that he gave Moses in the Old Testament. And then the development of that, there are like a little over 600 laws in Leviticus, Deuteronomy, in the Old Testament that God gives his people. And he gives them to his people so that they can remain pure in a community of people who are completely impure. I talk about Leviticus and all those things like don't sleep with animals, don't sleep with your sister, don't sleep with your mom, things like that. Those were given because people around them were actually doing those things. So you can see reasons that God wants to give them a set of rules to kind of keep them from destructive behavior. So God gives them the law, and this law is what their society is based on. So people who are like their politicians, they're powerful officials and things like that, are people who are really good at interpreting the law and really good at following the law. Because everything in society is based on this law. And your value comes in how good you are at keeping it. Okay? So this is the society that Paul speaks into. And, he was going into this area where purity was important and where people wanted to live righteously. But they focused so much on the outside, what other people could see as righteous, that they began to neglect the inside. And basically, because their society is based on laws, Paul presents this like a legal case. Okay? So he comes in and basically he builds a case in the first chapters of Romans for how lost we are as humanity, like the lostness of humanity, and the need for God to intervene. How are you doing today, lost person? Okay, intervene. So it's like these people, you guys, are so incredibly lost that you need God to do something. God gave us the law, so we realize that this is the expectation. The law is the standard, but everybody's living down here. And even the best of us aren't making it to the standard of the law. So Paul presents that. He says, we're all incredibly lost. All of humanity is lost, and we need God to do something. But then he goes on to present this good news. Okay? So he sets the tone with how hopeless we are. And then he throws hope in. And he gives us this good news that salvation is available to every one of us, to all of us. No matter what background we are, no matter what our identity is, no matter how we've sinned, and no matter what our heritage is. So, Jew, Gentile, no matter what. And if you don't know the difference between Jews and Gentiles, we're mostly Gentiles in here. The Jews were the descendants of Abraham, and they made up God's chosen people. So God made a covenant with these people, and that lasted until Jesus came. And basically because they rejected Jesus, salvation is opened up to everybody. So that means no matter who you are, what you look like, what color of your skin is, and what you've done in the past, you can be saved by grace through faith. That's Paul's Good news. We can be saved by grace. What is grace? Let's define grace. Anybody know a good definition of grace? Mercy? Yes. I usually say undeserved favor, but mercy is very close. It's love, affection, anything that we don't deserve. Okay? So we're justified not by anything we can do. So that means we're not held to the law anymore. There's nothing we can do to make it. But we can only be saved by grace and by the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. And that's where the faith comes in. We have to believe that his dying gave us that freedom. Okay, we have to believe that. And that's where justification comes in. So God gives us freedom from the power of sin. He gives us freedom from the laws that we never could follow and uphold in the first place. In the Old Testament, there was this whole sacrificial system. And if you messed up, you had to take an animal to the priest and they would kill it. And that would be the punishment for your sins. And we're going to talk about that more in the coming weeks. But there was a price of sin. There was a temporary price and a long-term price. And most of you guys have seen both of those in your life. Sin costs us. It may not seem like it right away, but it costs us. So what Christ did was he came and he gave us freedom from the power of sin in our lives. And he gave us freedom from the law. And he gave us the ability to be like Christ. He gave us the ability to be like Christ. Okay, so in view of God's mercy, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. So we have this law that we never could uphold. We have this law that if it was just based on that, okay, and the benefit of today is there's not someone there every time we break a law, right? That's good for most of us, right? Every time you litter, every time you speed, every time you jaywalk, that's a big problem in Denton. Every time you do something like that, what if there was someone to see you? How many times would you have been arrested? How many times would you have been punished if there was someone there that could see everything you ever did? And our laws aren't based on our morality and things like that as much as theirs were. So God sees everything you ever do. And God knows every thought you ever think. And he still offers you grace. He still loves you and he still offers you freedom from those thoughts and from those behaviors. And that is why we should give him everything. Because he went to such ridiculous, incredible lengths for your freedom. He wasn't satisfied with sin destroying your life. He wasn't satisfied with things having a hold of you and you not being able to control them. And guess what? Everybody, this is another concept that Paul talks about and I love it. Everybody's a slave to something. Whether pornography, lust, unhealthy relationships, everybody's a slave to something. And if you believe that being able to sin anytime you want makes you free, try to stop that sin and you'll see how free you are. Sin does not give us freedom. Sin is not proof of our freedom. We're all slaves to something. So guys, I want to challenge you to become a slave of God because what he wants is your freedom. Give yourself to God because he was willing to die himself so that you could be free. That sounds like a guy that I can follow, right? We have this connotation of slavery that's completely different from our culture. But God says, give me everything, and I'm going to give it right back to you. Surrender to me, and you'll find that the things that you gave up pale in comparison to what you get. And Paul is saying, because of all this, because of all these things, that's why we should worship God with all we have. That's why we should give him everything. Because he gave absolutely everything to us. And we live and we worry about giving up popularity, or we worry about giving up these things that comfort us. And I'm not going to make a list because you already know what you go to for comfort. And he says, give it up. And we're like, how could you ask me to do that? But we're asking a God who gave up his life. How can he ask us? Because he was willing to do even more than that. And he didn't deserve death. We do. Okay? So, basically, Paul says, every single one of us deserves nothing but death. But God, in Jesus, took that death that we deserved so that we wouldn't have to experience it. And Jesus died the death of a slave. You know, crucifixion wasn't a punishment for the high society. It was punishment of a slave. So God was willing to take the humblest position so that you could live free from sin, from pain, from frustrations. And we run to those sins instead of him for comfort. Something's wrong with that.